and welcome to the What Culture Wrestling podcast. I'm Michael Hamflett from WhatCulture, and I'm joined by Josh Brown from WhatCulture to discuss Josh Brown from WhatCulture's love of professional wrestling, or maybe his hatred. If you're a fan of this sort of thing, and I certainly am, make sure to subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts, where we not only preview and review Monday Night Raw, SmackDown, the show formerly known as NXT 2.0, AEW Dynamite, AEW Collision, pay-per-views, premium live events. We have wrestler interviews, roundtables, and have a round of the week complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on WrestleCulture. Josh, what a treat this is.
It really is.
Just like long-term listeners, right, will be aware that we are currently in something that we've affectionately titled Wacky Summer, which basically means we've all got kids now, and like it's impossible to all be in at the same time over the 6-week holidays.
Yeah.
Scott Tailford of your parish has been drafted in to discuss AEW in the past. But I am delighted to say that today, in place of our usual SmackDown coverage that we do on a Friday, previewing SmackDown ahead of a massive SummerSlam tomorrow, I've brought you in to kind of supply that a little bit WWE and a little bit wider wrestling, because over the desks in 2024, we've been talking about it.
Very much so, more than ever. I've always recently been flirting with getting back into the wrestling because I'm extremely lapsed, extremely casual when it comes to this medium, but I was well into it when I was younger, and I've always followed it. And I say that loosely. I've followed the idea of wrestling, actual wrestlers coming and going, certain storylines, big events. How can I not be in the vicinity of it when I'm desks away from you all talking about it non-stop and doing the content on it? Trapped, some would say. And it's been something of a joy. I can't lie to you. It's been a strange old time. I never envisioned myself watching the actual product again in 2024. But it's been wild, and I feel like a long time coming in a way.
Yeah. Is it like we are in, you'll be aware of this at this point, we're in what would be considered a massive boom period for WWE, especially. Wider wrestling as well, like AEW's about to do a very healthy number at Wembley again, but WWE especially, experiencing a boom period, the likes of which we've not seen since like the year 2000, and prior to that, the late 80s, a third completely unprecedented like upcycle for the company as this mainstream pop culture phenomenon again, which might explain, I guess, where you've kind of come back in. But what was your sort of, for those that don't know, for when you haven't spoken about it before, what would you say was your like entryway into wrestling or WWE or anything like this?
Well, first off, are you calling it Wacky Summer because you can't get away with calling it Brat Summer? Are you not having a Brat Summer? You're having a Dad Summer?
Have you seen how old we are? Like, the stuff we try and get away with just because we've all seen words on Twitter that are like 6 months old.
Very true.
And then apologetically drop them in. I don't know when Sid said drip for the first time and I was sick on my shoes. But like...
You don't want Brat Summer.
Hey!
I mean, I do quite like that.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Do you know, like, the most un-Brat Summer way of learning what a Brat Summer was when I heard them discussing it on a Guardian podcast. I was like, well, Brat Summer's finished then.
Yeah, Brat
right
Summer's
there.
over now. It's been declared dead. Anyway, back to the actual wrestling. It was, I imagine, like many people my age or similar, got into wrestling by pure happenstance, was around friends, and they had the VHS tapes, the compilations of, at the time, you know, the TLC matches between the Hardy Boys and Edge and Christian and the Dudley Boys or the Dudley Boys, and just getting into like those compilations and having not seen that kind of thing before, done in that way. And obviously I'm a much younger person and I'm believing every single story beat. Yeah, no, much younger than you, both physically and metaphorically. No, not at all. And it was just like just seeing something fantastical, spectacular, theatrical. And it was that sort of sense of theater that I absolutely loved. You know, I spent as much time playing wrestling games for the actual in-ring wrestling.
Of course,
I've gone to wrestling games now, but I spent as much time creating a wrestler, doing the walk-in music, making every camera angle right, all that stuff, man. Just buying into that was absolutely sensational, and to get back into it now, much older, and being able to appreciate it for how much effort that takes and how effortless they make it look to do it week in and week out. I'm not talking just the performance, I'm talking about the production of it. Yeah. That has been really cool to see something like, you know, a WrestleMania or a SummerSlam coming up being put together in the amount of graft that goes into it and blending the line between kayfabe and like reality. It's just, Adam Nicholas knows, he's looking over there. I'm a sucker for I can, not be familiar with a film or a television show, but if you have an interesting behind-the-scenes story and you write a book about it, I will read that book.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for me, wrestling is full of so many gnarly behind-the-scenes stories that's actually what got me back into it as an adult. It was reading the circus around the production of it, everything that's gone on, everything that's going on, how, until probably very recently, how unregulated everything was, how just slapdash it was, and
it's still slapdash and unregulated.
At least it kind of feels like a business now since they got acquired. I don't know. WWE, of course.
Yeah, I think that's like, there's never been a time more than now, and I would say this is probably for the last 10 years, especially since the advent of the WWE Network and the need for so much additional content to support just the wrestling itself, where those two things are kind of one and the same. The fact that WWE could produce a documentary about this year's WrestleMania and it have almost nothing to do with what you were seeing on camera, speaks to that now. And this is years and years and years of these specials where they'll follow a wrestler around for a year at a time or a weekend, and you'll not see them living a particularly nice life, or they'll be explaining just how difficult it was to work under Vince McMahon, or just how challenging the working environment is, all of that sort of stuff. I think they're comfortable with it being one and the same now. And I want to touch on something that I don't think that we, like, as wrestling fans, specifically myself, Willborn Sidgwick, or anybody that has just found wrestling through wrestling, that you picked up on there about the wrestling games. I think it's one of the reasons why merchandising, licensing, gaming and everything was always such an important bit of WWE strategy in becoming the market leader. Because when I was younger, if I got into wrestling through nothing more than wrestling, it was a case of your mates that liked it or your mates that thought it was fake nonsense, fake sport, I'm never gonna like it. And there was kind of a thick line drawn. If you found it through a game or through a toy or through any kind of merchandise like that, you're gonna be more invested in that. And the TV show almost just becomes supporting like content, shoulder programming for the game. If you've seen, I don't know, like a Steve Austin on a game the first time, and then you think, this is brilliant, and he just runs in and he stuns people, or he's got his little car.
Yeah.
Like, why would I not want to see that on TV in real life? And you're coming at wrestling from a totally different perspective than somebody that's just showing, well, he's not hitting him for real. And thus, my brother hates it as much as I love it, and yet is able to enjoy films or television or theatre or whatever it is, and not be able to see why they're one and the same. Whereas I think if you've played I think the game's probably the best example, because the amount of people that would have played those, especially the SmackDown series of games on the PlayStation, because they were so accessible.
Yeah.
It does sort of feel like it'd be easier just to switch on and be like, oh yeah, it's just off the game.
Yeah, it kind of was. It was strange for me in particular, because I was more exposed to the games or to the toys especially, had so much fun with them. And the actual series, the television programs, the pay-per-views especially, I was only ever experiencing those well after the fact through those compilations or what, a friend of a friend had taped on Sky, because I didn't have access to them back then. I don't know what channel it would have been, but it would have been a paid-for Sky channel that I didn't have. So a lot of the exposure I had to it was kind of outdated in a way. The only run I remember watching live, and it might not have even been live because I was a kid and would have believed anything, but what felt current was like the Eddie Guerrero WWE Championship run against the likes of JBL and stuff, like that sort of small period. Really enjoyed, but everything else was kind of just this strange I don't know, kind of amalgamation of wrestling history. And I knew what I liked, and I knew what I didn't like. But it's interesting with the games and the toys, because the games made everything feel current in it. It gave everything like a through line that I obviously didn't have with the actual product itself, if that makes sense. For instance, if I'm getting SmackDown Here Comes the Pain and it has Brock Lesnar on the front, and Brock Lesnar isn't in the old game, I'm not playing that old game, brother. You know what I mean? That was instantly outdated, and it felt like...
Well, once a year as well, so the cycle's always renewing sort of thing.
Absolutely, and it was more so than any other annual release, looking at like pairs of FIFA or whatever, when the rosters of the sports changed. This was like stars coming in, right? And new marquee characters that you would buy the games to be and to do the moves of, and it kind of the fastness of that I always thought was impressive, and I didn't realize how fast that stuff was until I've started watching it again recently and started talking to like you guys. Like, you could have told me that I don't know, Stone Cold was at the top of his game for 15 years, and I'd have been like, yeah, I'm sure he was always a headliner, and then you realize, or like the Attitude Era was a 20-year period, and you go back and it's like a couple of years max. It
felt like that sometimes. No, it's you know, again, another great point you raise, I think, from being outside the bubble a little bit is that, and I'm not making this comparisons in terms of their art forms here, so with apologies to the musician I'm about to name, it's a bit like telling somebody to give Bob Dylan a go. And it's like, well, where the hell do I start? Like, you go to Bob Dylan's Spotify, hundreds and hundreds of songs and albums, and you've been given no recommendation, and you might be able to discern from that top 5, like, what's the most streamed.
Yeah.
But beyond that, like, where on earth do you go to get started? This is a 52-week-a-year product and has been, by and large, well, since 1993 at least. And then beyond that, I mean, even I had a Voyager Discovery getting into it in, say, 1990, and realistically, I only had about 5 or 6 years of regularly videoed content with which to catch up on. So it's nothing compared to what somebody that got into it today and actually wanted to become a historian or actually wanted to go back. It's an impossible job. You've got to love it. I always use the example that wrestling looks to hook kids young and hook them forever like cigarettes, because it tries to foster an addiction, because only that's what's going to make you go and try and understand the context of all of these characters, or try and Randy Orton is still around, but if you wanted to go back to day one of Randy Orton, you'd have to go back to 2002 and then chart a very, very strange 20-year run that's had as many downs as it's had ups and things like that. And it's a product that almost encourages you to just watch this one episode and then catch up on everything else. Well, everything else is an entire life's work. How on earth am I going to do that? You know, it asks quite a lot from you as a fan to keep up regularly. And it sort of brings me on to early this year and the build to WrestleMania and The Office every other day going wild for something else that was going on in that insane build, and something I'm very pleased to say that like you were a part of. Do you want to go into a bit of detail on how exactly like wrestling sucked you back into its gross maw? It was early this year, wasn't it?
It was earlier this year, sort of, I guess, end of last year when The Rock came back, and there were all of those behind-the-scenes reports about politicking and him changing the main event of WrestleMania. Like I said before, that kind of real-life stuff blending with the fixture, the storylines, like that's why I'm interested at all.
Nicholas is a massive fan.
Yeah.
Loves to win.
How many times have I asked... Oh, is that a lie, Adam Nicholas? Is that a fib, eh? I thought I had someone in my corner there.
It's not about me, it's about you.
Oh, so I'm told.
He loves The Rock.
Like that. I mean, I think before then I was sort of on an up with it, because I remember asking you a few times about like different conflicts that were going on, different interpersonal things that were making their ways into storylines, different behind the scenes shenanigans. You know, obviously the rift between WWE and AEW, and Cody going from one to the other, and all the baggage that comes with that. And that is what I love from these storylines. Absolutely, like the intrigue that gets in the way it worms in my brain is sensational. So when I watched that segment of like The Rock coming back for the first time, and he's dropping the hints that he wants to be the head of the table, and then that's spiraling out into these stories that he's come in to swing his check around and his sway over the board around to change the storylines, and the apparent thing of Triple H kind of pushing back against that, Cody pointing at Roman and then having to hand in the title, like that mess. I was just fascinated with how are they going to pull this off into a satisfying climax, because I feel like after the initial disappointment, it felt like they could do it right. It felt like they could actually use that to their advantage. And like I said, I never watched it previously, but I'd heard about all the times where this had gone wrong before, whether it was like the Daniel Bryan push or whatever it was in the past, where they had reacted poorly. I guess this was under Vince's reign, reacted poorly to organic pushes like that, or organic storylines, and
stubbornness
melding their creative vision with what was maybe best for the story itself. But this time it kind of felt different, and like they could do something special with it. And I think it helps as well that the people that were involved had enough, I don't know whether this is true for everyone, but had enough star power and draw to draw in and intrigue people who weren't even watching week to week. Like until WrestleMania, I had never seen Cody Rhodes wrestle a match. Yeah. But I knew about his journey, right? I knew about him as in WWE being underused as gimmick characters, going on to AEW, being instrumental of that, coming back. I watched his pop when he came back at, I think it was WrestleMania 39 or whatever it was. So I knew about that story, and I don't know why that pushed through, but I guess it was just because people like you and whoever were like passionate about it. It was all I was seeing online, and it felt like something that I wanted to be a part of. Like, it gave me real FOMO that I wasn't there for him losing the first time.
The arm,
yes, slapping the arm. And then, of course, like, you have all that intrigue. And then you have The Rock coming back, someone I do have that connection with, like you said, both in wrestling itself, but then as an actor and being like one of the biggest superstars. And it's interesting, again, the meta thing around The Rock as a character, but Dwayne Johnson as a person, because it's like, okay, he's back, but then my brain's thinking, well, why is he back now? Is it because, his films are starting to not do as well? Like, what's he going to have to bring to the table? Is he going to bring that arrogance from the movie world over? Is he going to bomb in WWE like he's started to decline in the movie space? Or is he going to use this to get a star back up and then jump off? So it was like a perfect storm, I think.
I think it felt that way. Like, in hindsight, it's easy to say this, but it sort of worked out that way for everybody, because there was a brief period where everyone was in danger of not getting what they wanted.
Yeah.
All the things you've outlined there. Cody wasn't going to get the WrestleMania match that he wanted, that fans had invested in. The Rock going back to his kind of safe space in terms of a public setting, a place where, Christ, they're being pretty nasty to me on Twitter. I could do with going and getting 20,000 people screaming my name.
Yeah.
And he was about to blow that as well. The only person that was maybe going to benefit was Roman Reigns, who could just sit back and let them sort it out. And if I keep my belts, that's great for me. But The Rock, I think, definitely, from my point of view, as having like lapsed fan friends, that impact is sort of undeniable. And sometimes I'm even at great pains to admit, I love most of what The Rock does.
Yeah.
But just the reality of his influence is remarkable. Honestly, there are so few wrestlers that have ever crossed over like The Rock, and then simultaneously there are so few wrestlers now that are able to take something and wrestling feel like it can still be like a monoculture again. This boom just wasn't driven by The Rock, and there's so many different factors as to why WWE right now is business is on fire. But I think just nobody saw it coming because nobody thought it possible. The idea that one singular hobby could attract so many people again seemed, because that's just not the case in all pop culture now. You can have massive stars, someone like a Taylor Swift, but they're going to be in a tiny supply compared to this enormous group of things underneath where you can find your own tribe and you can find your own interest. Way more than it used to be. Way more certainly than the last time WWE boomed at the turn of the century, when pop culture was narrowed down to, say, something in the UK, for example, on 5 channels, or something in America based on only very few sort of spheres of interest, shall we say. And for WWE to be a hot and enjoyable show from a narrative point of view and get The Rock at the same time is honestly a case of him doing right by the business. Well, he's on the board of directors, he would want to. But it's a case of him doing right by the business, because he's come in, his presence has brought eyes. Those eyes have seen something that is pretty good, and those eyes have stuck around and they've continued to watch. And that's sort of how the machine is supposed to work. That's how you're supposed to use big stars. But for all the years that Vince just had a fascination with his old favourites, it would always be at the expense. Like the Attitude Era was nicknamed by Dolph Ziggler. You might have heard the name Dolph Ziggler. Was nicknamed the Gratitude Era, because the idea was they were just always supposed to bend over and pay respect and kiss the feet of the Attitude Era, as opposed to just trying to get over themselves. And this has felt like a seed change in that regard with The Rock. I guess, like, maybe, I don't know if this is a now or a then, or how much nostalgia you've got. What sticks out, like, for some of your favourite matches or moments? And that, like, this can include going up to like WrestleMania 40 or anything you've seen this year. But what would you say, like, sort of the defining moments for you as a fan?
Can I go back to what you said just previously before answering that? I think you're absolutely. Well, I know you're spot on, because you're one of the greatest wrestling minds I've ever spoke to.
Thanks, son. Thanks, son.
That's the last name he's on, yeah.
Well,
he's raised me well. He really has.
Will be clipping of that.
What you mentioned about 10 hours ago about wrestling's like kind of long-term storytelling, sometimes being prohibitive, but also kind of its greatest strength, because they hook you early, and then you'll kind of have certain stars or certain runs or whatever it is in your mind for like the entire thing. Like, that was kind of what I've struggled with for a while, because I've often felt the frequency of the shows and the length of the shows to be prohibitive and getting me a kind of jumping on point. I never felt like there was for me, a storyline, entry point, I guess. Like, every kind of big thing that caught my interest was like the climax of something. It was like The Undertaker retiring, and I guess Cody, going over to WWE might have been the start, but I didn't know where that was going to go. I didn't know if I could trust the storytelling to pay that off in any meaningful way. But I think what's changed for me, at least, is that, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but the perception I had of WWE specifically, and I guess mostly only them, because the competition never was on the mainstream level over the past decade.
They're the market leader kind of in every respect. For them, they want the shorthand of wrestling to be WWE. That's always been their philosophy, yeah.
Totally. It was always, like you said, even only knowing a little bit about the production process, like even I knew it was the Vince show, and I knew he had his ways, and I knew how many storylines he'd botched, the type of wrestlers that he would want to push and stuff, and I looked at that and I thought that might be interesting, but it's not something I want to watch. You know what I mean? It's not a product that I would believe in or think has potential, because all I'd ever seen and heard was the likes of you and everyone else in this office coming in and talking about how they disappointed yet again and they're not paid.
You wrote the odd list,
yeah. 1 or 2 lists, maybe a couple of videos. You should think about starting a channel, maybe. But this time around, obviously, with Vince kind of leaving and then Triple H coming in as creative, I don't know, for the first time ever, the product felt hot. It felt hotter than ever. And it also felt like it was actually doing something a bit different and doing stuff that I couldn't have seen over the past 20 years in this company specifically. Like The Rock coming back. The Rock's come back so many times before and I haven't been asked. The Rock comes back this time and suddenly he's a heel. Suddenly he's starting to swear. Suddenly he's incorporating his social media presence. Suddenly you're getting these press events that are shot differently from anything I've seen in wrestling up until that point. You're getting this subtle shift in production where, you're seeing a different kind of blocking for the matches. You're seeing a different kind of blocking for the entrance. You're coming in from Gorilla. You're going out to see like the big stadium shots and stuff. And it was just visually interesting. It was narratively interesting, and it made me think. I don't know what this is. You know what I mean? This is maybe WWE's been like this in the past, but I've never seen it like this.
No, you're a dream for their current PR.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, this is exactly like everything they're aiming for.
Absolutely.
Like, none of this feels like an accident in their attempt to, for a variety of reasons we might get to in this podcast, shift it away from one era to a new one. Yeah. If they're catching you back and saying, oh, it is different, and it's discernibly different this way and this way. Like, some of the things you've isolated there are things that when the first time they happen, it's all that's discussed the next day on wrestling Twitter.
Right.
It's like, look at that. Oh my God. Like, because that's not been seen in 20 years or whatever,
Absolutely. And I think just as a final thing before I answer you, the question that you asked, like, it also helped for me that Rock coming back, like, again, even me as someone who doesn't know much about the business, I know that's finite. I know he's not coming back as a full-timer. Yeah. I know everyone's complaining that, he might come back part-time and win the title and then, go away and, oh my God, you're throwing all these other guys under the bus. So I knew that this storyline, it's building up to WrestleMania and it's probably going to have like a bit of a break after then. So in my head, I'm thinking, well, I know this story's got a beginning, middle, and end now. And I know they might mess that up, but it's like I can jump in here. And of course, it doesn't work in a vacuum. It has all of this stuff that's been going on for years and years at a time, decades, if you throw in like The Rock's history and then his heel turn or whatever, and the references to the last heel turn or whatever it is. But in the short term, what I can focus on is this storyline right now, and it's going to end at WrestleMania, and then it's going to feel like a complete thing. And I never felt like I had that previously, so that was something that changed this time that made me think, okay, this is less of an investment. It's not going to be hours and hours of wrestling every week to get a climax at some point. It's going to be a short but really intense stint that I can like just lose myself in for a bit. And that event feeling is so cool because, what I've always liked about the wrestling sort of business and the enthusiasm and passion people have for it is that just kind of like love of the characters. And, to me, the closest comparison is something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe now, right? Like Deadpool and Wolverine is going to be like the highest grossing R-rated blockbuster ever.
Right.
In part because it's relying on the fact that people love Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, and Hugh Jackman's Wolverine is back, baby, and he's encountering characters he's never encountered before, and he's being able to swear, and he's being able to do all these different things, and you see a new side of him. But primarily, it's the guy that you love, and he's back, and he's doing interesting things. And to me, that's the Rock thing, where the guy you love has been back before, but is he doing anything interesting? Is he doing anything new? Is he just relying on kind of nostalgia? I don't know. I didn't watch it, but I didn't get that feeling.
Yes,
this time around.
Every time.
The Rock's back and he's doing his old shtick, but he's doing new stuff as well. And that just clicked something in my brain where I was like, I want to see the development of this person and this character and where they're going to take that. Because anytime someone does that in media with real people or fictional characters, I think that long-term investment is something we gravitate towards, maybe. I don't know. I'm talking on me backside.
No, it's when you were saying there about like articulating like what you were really investing in is the blessing and the curse of being a wrestling fan, because every story, in theory, has the potential to make you feel that way. Every single time two wrestlers find themselves involved in a long-term storyline, at least, maybe not like a 1 week throwaway thing. Ideally, you think that. Now, of course you can't. Of course, you're going to everyone's got slightly different tastes, and everyone's going to prefer certain wrestlers or prefer certain ways to tell the story or whatever. But where wrestling, especially now, always falls down because it's funded more than ever by TV rights, more than, say, like a big destination pay-per-view. You could work in a cycle of a 2 to 3 month story that paid off on a show that you would convince people to pay $50 for or whatever. TV money is where the money is now. So it's never been more important that you've got people on the hook 52 weeks. And what you described is something totally different. If, you know, a lot of calls for an off-season have been in place, not just for the health of the wrestlers, but for the idea that, well, absence will make the heart grow fonder, or the idea that you get to take a break as a fan, just a little breather, means that you're going to come back more invested than you were, rather than when it's grinding down a little bit. But that's not how wrestling makes its money. What it's done is occupied like this grey area where the only thing that makes big money in television now, like linear television, is live sport.
Yeah.
So say, for example, American football will still command enormous money because people want to watch it as it's happening. Wrestling somehow sold itself as the same thing. If you don't watch Raw on a Monday night, by Tuesday, you're going to have it spoiled. All the sort of stuff's going to be online. You're not going to have that first-time feeling, the pop, the excitement. There's something will like get in the way of what the real experience should be. And wrestling has managed to somehow find that exact same space as real sport. And it'll never stop as a result. As long as there is all this money to be made, it will continue to win. It won't create gaps or it won't create off seasons. So then fans have to do it themselves. And where I think you're in a real sweet spot is that you're actually able to do it. Psychopaths like me cannot lift myself from it. Sometimes I wish I could. But wrestling wants people like me.
Yeah, of course.
They want you every single week to be just as invested as you were the last week. And it's impossible. But, you know, it wants to find you as many characters and stories for you to love it just as much. And that's why we, in our little bubble, you do have favourites that you cling to, and they would pretend they wouldn't, but they want you to form parasocial relationships with your favourite wrestlers, or have favourite matches with which you base every other match against, you know, because like there's the standard. Every week, your job in every single match is to meet that standard, otherwise you're a disgusting failure. Right? That's honestly, like that is often like the extremes they deal with.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it's to even you mentioned Eddie Guerrero versus JBL, right? And there was just a twinkling in your eye as you said it. And I remember watching that and wanting to boycott SmackDown because I hated JBL. So how fucking dare you? How dare you let loser Bradshaw get that title? Like, I saw this as some sort of like disgrace. Like, it's just to like have completely different experiences. Again, is something. 20,000 people in a building and no one person's going to have an identical relationship with the product. That feels alien. Like you used Deadpool and Wolverine as an example, right? A cinema full of people going to see Wolverine and Deadpool will have a relatively similar relationship with the characters. I would imagine there'll be maybe some comic book people and some just cinema people, but other than that,
you're right. Yeah,
you're not going to get that at a wrestling show.
That's a fascinating wrinkle because I was like what you said there about Deadpool and Wolverine or sports more generally. I was going to describe like the electricity that you get from. For me, it's watching, England or the Euros and like the pop and the excitement that I'll get about being around other England fans when we equalise or win a penalty shootout. It's like electric, and it's similar, I imagine. And I've only ever experienced this through a screen, but the pop you get for like one of your favourites returning. Like I said,
should be it. It should replicate that. Yeah.
Never watched any wrestling matches during my off period, but every time someone returned, whether it was Edge or whoever, like I was watching that pop over and over again. I was watching those entrances every time across different shows just to get that hit of other people being absolutely buzzing that this thing that they maybe never thought was going to happen. Again, kind of like me watching England win a penalty shootout for the first time, never thinking that was going to happen. But I never thought about what you said there in that aspect of if I'm watching a football match, it's going to be mostly England fans and maybe a few fans of the opposite team, but there are only really two big reactions you can get, whereas this is characters and the stories and you have your favourites and there's a bunch of different matches on and there's more maybe nuances to the reaction there. That's really cool. I always like coming into this office, even when I've not seen the program after a big AEW pay-per-view or whatever it is, and seeing the reactions of you lot and then the reactions of Scott Tailford, and just kind of like, it can be so polar opposite on things that I assumed because I'm not in the bubble and I've just seen the consensus on social media or Reddit or whatever, and it can be so divergent in that way. And I like that a lot. And I like, not having a personal stake in it, so I can love what I love and come on here and I might get shouted for my takes, probably will, but I'm like, well, I just disconnect from this.
Just get to watch the fights.
I just get to watch the fights and I get to watch the stories, and then like you said, I get to sort of dip out a little bit, because since WrestleMania, I watched Backlash immediately afterwards, and then since then, I watched SummerSlam this week, but I've only kept up with the storylines through like the clips that WWE themselves release on YouTube or whatever it is. But one final thing. You mentioned, again, ages ago. I'm so sorry for rambling on.
No, this is great.
Mentioned ages ago about that idea of they get me in, or they get new viewers in for like the big changes, and then that trickles down to the rest of the product. And I have found that's like really, really worked in me. Like going into SummerSlam, back in WrestleMania, it was like The Rock, it was Roman, it was Cody, of course. This time around, that Cody match can kind of go over there. I want to watch the Liv and Rhea Ripley match, you know what I mean? That's the storyline I'm into at this moment in time. I want to see how that pays off.
I bet you are, you dirty old bollocks.
Hey, Dominic Mysterio. It's electric.
It's been huge. It's been like Liv Morgan's been kind of made as a top star for the first time. It's one of the big ones. Yeah.
And then on top of that, you've got like, I think it's the main event with CM Punk and Drew and Seth. And that
I didn't tell him to call it the main event.
Is it not the main event?
No, it'd be Cody and Solo. But I like that's the real main event, and we all know it is.
It's the real main event for me. But
damn right it is.
Finally, to circle back around to your question of like the favorite matches. I knew about the Drew and CM Punk and Seth stuff kind of going into WrestleMania, mostly through Punk. I'd never really watched Seth before. But that match between Seth and Drew was like my favorite of the weekend. I thought that was sensational. I thought it was electric. I was so in it. And I thought that was impressive because I hadn't followed the storylines like I had the rest of them. But that made me come out thinking, these guys rule, and I want to follow this now. And the same thing happened with like Liv and stuff. It's like, I wasn't aware of your game, and now I'm aware of your game, and I want to see how this plays out. So it definitely has that kind of, for me anyway, that sort of trickle down effect of, okay, this is what I came for, but I'm kind of being distracted by all of this over here, and oh my God, I think I'm into this ecosystem now.
That's what they want. That is honest. It's such a, it's 3 hours on a Monday, 2 on a Friday, even more on these weekend shows. There's a 3-hour pre-show for SummerSlam tomorrow. I don't even know if I'm going to get through that, and I'm a sucker for this stuff, but like, there was something I wanted to touch on there quickly before we just move on. As somebody that has to suffer us lot as colleagues, right? Beyond WhatCulture Wrestling and anything like that, what's your relationship, if there is one, with wrestling media? That can be anything on socials or particular outlets that you might enjoy, which you are allowed to say, unless it's ones we don't like, and we'll walk this tightrope. Yeah. But if any, what sort of relationship do you have with wrestling through your phone screen, as like a lot of people do from a bit of a distance? Yeah,
well, until Musk bought it, right? All my algorithm, genuinely, in it was wrestling. I don't know why it would throw me up. It was just the thing that kept getting pushed to me all the time, and I didn't hate it. So it was kind of, it wasn't really people in the media or whatever. I guess there were probably some talking heads I wasn't aware of, but it was just kind of like a general splurge of opinions and highlight clips and whatnot. But recently, when I've been trying to get into like at least the behind the scenes stuff, that's when I kind of started watching and listening to things more specifically. I think the big one was the Behind the Bastards episodes, little mini series on Vince McMahon, because again, that was about Vince McMahon primarily, but there were so many. You had to talk about the context of wrestling as a whole, right? And it was I imagine it wasn't perfect, but it was so interesting to discover about like the origins of wrestling and the original ties and how it developed and how it was initially this kind of fragmented thing, and then it became this with like territories and stuff. I'm sure this is basic information to everyone listening or watching this.
But you need the context is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't know anything about that. Then you get into like some of like the more tragic events, like Owen Hart and what happened to Owen Hart, like a bunch of other situations. And I think, funnily enough, my interest in that stuff, and this shows how perhaps basic I am, comes from The Wrestler, the movie The Wrestler.
Yeah.
That was one where I thought I was out this game for good, and I watched Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler, and then I was the obnoxious guy going to all my pals going like, hey, wrestling's real, right? Like, yeah, it's scripted, but like these guys are tough. You won't understand their lives, man. But that like opened my eyes in that way, and then sort of went down that route. But otherwise, it's kind of like, I know only because of you, and I guess this isn't what you asked, but like the idea of what's his face, Dave
Meltzer.
Dave Meltzer giving his star ratings out. I've seen, of course, the discussions about those star ratings in this office for years. But otherwise, it's kind of like YouTube channels that would summarize an old pay-per-view for me. I think it's shout them out. I don't know much about them, but apart from the content, but I think it's like Wrestling Bios, who will summarize like these old pay-per-views and talk you through the stories and then talk you through a bit behind the scenes. And I love that, like just getting to know, just it's kind of summarizing like what you described there as years and years of storytelling into a nice, just digestible, condensed 20-minute like hit. That totally made it kind of, it made me more invested in the current storylines, but it made me more appreciative of stuff that I otherwise would have thought way too impenetrable and dense to ever even dip my toe into. Because like you said, where the hell do you even start?
It is intimidating, I can imagine, for people, especially like, maybe not though, because I suppose as a hobby, if you like it, you're not thinking about the work. You just think, I want more of that wrestler or whatever. But no, I look now upon something like the WWE Network archive and just think there are things there that people will never get to watch. That it would, like, this kind of content storage would have been like in my wildest dreams as a kid, and there's going to be, I'm never going to complete it. I could be like my life's work trying to finish everything on that thing. It's like somebody trying to complete Netflix at this point. And WWE will be there in January 2025 as well. They're going to, like, all of it's going to port there, so it'll effectively be the closest to sort of terrestrial television. It could open up that door even wider to people, which brings with it on sort of like next question and the other side of all of this. People will have noticed the difference in having you on, because we've just been broadly, if not positive, certainly very enthusiastic in our discussions of pro wrestling. And as people in the bubble, we're collectively, one's pretty good at it, but collectively we're not always the most positive about everything we see. And I'm assuming that's got to be the case with you too. You're a very discerning man when it comes to film and music. I steal all my best takes and things from you. Where does that sit with wrestling? What are the things, either when you were watching the first time, that like maybe sent you packing from it, or even the things now that you watch, or by osmosis, like, it's far from a perfect game?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think for me, right, it's all in that Frank Ocean lyric where he says, my TV's not HD because that S word's too real, right?
Right.
I have an issue with, this is going to sound dumb perhaps, the resolution and camera work on at least modern WWE matches, because, how do I say this without sounding reductive or dumb or derogatory, but obviously wrestling is a performance, right? And obviously, you understand that, you know that, but I know, right? Can you believe it? What the hell? And I know there's people who like don't get a lot out of it without like being invested in it being real. But I want to buy the emotional reality of the matches. Like, I'm impressed by the athleticism, but I don't. That's not enough to kind of draw me in. Like, I think it's telling that we've talked this long and I've not really talked about like a specific match, because what I'm interested in is like the characters and the storyline.
It's half the job. It's half the job, and I will get pelters for that all the time. But I have to fight that corner. Like, I think it's precisely half of what makes wrestling great is the wrestling. Sometimes, if I'm honest, I want a bit less.
Right.
But that's not for everybody. Again, that speaks to how splintered different factions of what people want to watch wrestling for. You wouldn't get the full agreement off an Andy Murray, just as you wouldn't a Sidgwick or anybody else out there or anybody on our channel. There's so much about it that there is to like. It's
like the graphics versus gameplay question when it comes to games. It's like,
is that one to set you and Scott off?
Yeah.
You have to tell me the ones that are just like.
Yeah, literally you would be. I'm like, I love graphics and presentation, and Scott's like, he couldn't care less. It could look like a toaster, but if it plays well, that's all he's kind of interested in.
Why he likes AEW. Sorry.
But that's the thing with AEW, for instance, like, I've no doubt that it's amazing. I've no doubt they're home to some of the best wrestlers in the world. But every time Scott's tried to show me a match, for instance, like, it's one of those things where I'm never going to sit there and say it's bad. Like, who wants to hear that match is bad for me? I have no idea what I'm talking. I don't really know what makes a good wrestling match from a bad wrestling match, other than what I want out of it and the vibes that I'm looking for. But in terms of like the pure athleticism, the way the match is structured, I only get so much from that. So when someone says like, watch this match and it'll make you a believer, like, I can enjoy it in the same way I can enjoy a fight scene out of context from a movie and say, that's great, but I'm not going to feel it the way I wanted to feel it. And what gets me in and what got me back in is just the idea of what are the characters doing previously and what are they doing in that storyline. So what I sometimes lack from the actual wrestling itself, especially in WWE, is the clarity in the actual graps and seeing the construction of them. Why I loved the Seth and Drew match at WrestleMania is because it made me believe it. It made me question, like, he's hitting pretty hard there. You know what I mean? Like,
okay, yeah.
There's the selling of it. And I don't want to get in. I know that's a minefield of, like, how should wrestlers sell? But to me, it's like, if the match doesn't have that, like, intense element of I'm selling this, I'm telling a story through my selling, I can still like it, I can still appreciate it, but it's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for them to, pretend more of anything. like sell that, man.
Yeah. No, I think you've probably gone even more match-based than I would have expected somebody who would make. Like, I don't know if I'm calling you a casual fan or if, like, if you consider yourself more than that, but I think the amount of casual fans or lapsed fans that'll dip their toe back in, I don't think they'd land on selling. Do you know what I mean? I don't think they'd necessarily, like, you probably got more about it than you realise, because I think a lot of people would just say, it just looked fake. It's like, well, I wanted to show you this because it was the best thing in this match. I didn't believe it. They haven't got a bruise on their face after a punch or whatever it is. If you can't, we get asked all the time, and I always hate to poo-poo the question, but it's always like, oh, what match would you show the one fan if I don't believe there's such a thing. I think you have to have already subconsciously submitted to this big dumb thing in the first place. Otherwise, nothing that anybody can do will sell you on it. Paul Heyman has a sort of version of that as a phrase. It's something along the lines of, I always bastardize this, but it's something like, if you get it, no explanation is necessary. If you don't, no explanation will do. And I feel like that's it. I think you could argue till you're blue in the face with somebody about why this is great, but if they just do not see it, wrestling's one of the things that they can't be moved on.
Oh, I'm pleased you've jogged my memory on this, because I did have one rehearsed thing that I wanted to say. It was pretty much echoing what you said there.
We're workers, brother.
We absolutely are, man.
To your high spot.
To me, it's exactly what you said. It's like I when I started getting into this stuff again, and I was like describing it to people, I was like, this is so wanky. I was like, it's like poetry, right? Like when I was doing English, doing English lit, it rhymes. It's like poetry. No, when I was doing English lit at A level back in school, like, I remember going to, like, the teachers, because I was a horrible smart ass kid. I was like, I just don't get it. You know what I mean? Why are we doing this? I don't get it. I don't feel anything from this array of words structured in this way. Like, I just did not understand. And then as I grew up and started to actually read more poetry and get something from it, I was like, how don't you get it? You know what I mean? But I totally understand people who look at it and don't, receive that impact. It's the same like art or whatever, you interpret a picture. I can stand there for like 5 hours sometimes and just be like, yeah, it's pretty. It's pretty, it's well done, I'm sure, but I'm not feeling anything. Same with wrestling.
The paint is well worked.
Yeah.
That flower looks just like a flower.
Yeah, Van Gogh's really not selling that here. What the hell? But I guess to go back to something with a bit easier comparison for me, so I could wrap my brain around it, going back to like fight scenes in movies, it is the difference between, I really hate right now these kind of one take, almost drone shot action movies where so much is going on, everything's perfectly choreographed, no one misses a beat, and it's usually set just like from one wide angle. And it kind of looked impressive the first time you saw it, but now I see it and it feels like soulless, and I look at it and I just think, okay, but what am I getting from this? What are you doing in this scene that I'm supposed to be gravitating towards? Whereas you can get something that's got faster cuts, maybe a little bit sloppier, but if you if you have the emotion at the heart of it, it just works on a better way, even though they're probably both the same in terms of technical quality, in terms of technical ability, in terms of choreography, or selling the acting. And that's kind of the comparison I draw, rather than like real or fake when it comes to the wrestling. It's like just the way it's presented, the way it's set up. I don't even know how to describe why one works and one doesn't, but that Drew and Seth one, it worked. I felt it. It just felt like I felt like I was watching people go to war rather than watching professional athletes do a job. And both is cool, but I'm probably
that's the
that.
Suspension of disbelief define that, really, isn't it? Like, that's what if you're not thinking and you're just feeling they've got it right, whatever the context is. I think like an action movie is such a great example to base this on, and not just because of fight scenes, but because of the idea that, of course, as everything evolves, things are going to, theoretically at least, improve in quality. But myself and Sige especially have this like existential crisis all the time about good wrestling, capital G, capital W, because the work rate, to use a term that's familiar in our little world, has increased exponentially and objectively. What these people do with their bodies only ever gets more physically impressive. However, increasingly that feels like it's kind of coming at the expense of just a match making you feel. CM Punk is a perfect example right now because the man hasn't like thrown a punch in anger since the Royal Rumble in January, and he's in the hottest feud of the year because wrestling is about so much more than wrestling, and he gets accused of being washed because he suffers these injuries and things like that. There are these younger, hungrier wrestlers that are doing more with their body and may have to retire younger or God knows what that wrestlers 10 years ago did, that did 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But film feels the same, right? Like action movies being CGI'd half to death, or that exact like sort of description you use of a fight scene there might look, in theory, to be light years better than something from, say, like an 80s action flick. But lots of people will argue that they just can't feel for it like they did for that. And the older stuff becomes more timeless as a result because it's, I don't know, a little bit truer to the form, a little bit truer to the art. I think like when you watch old wrestling that holds up today, it's kind of miraculous because it has no right to, and then you realize it's because what they're doing is the art of it more than just how incredible how's that guy been able to do 4 flips? How is he going so fast? Or landing so acutely on his neck? Like, almost analysing different things. It's not quite apples and oranges, but sometimes you worry that it's becoming that way.
Yeah, and it's like, like I said, I don't want to sit here as someone whose leg, is at a 90-degree angle at all times, and I can't even straighten it out, like criticizing these like immense athletes who are putting on huge shows.
Never taken a bump in my life, and I never want to. That's
who are like at the peak of their prowess, like you said, who are working better than ever, putting together matches that are more technically impressive than we've ever seen. But like, I don't know, sometimes I want to watch like Neo in the Matrix take on 5 agents in the Matrix Reloaded, and sometimes like one punch in a Rocky movie like just makes you get up and punch the air, right? It's like I believe in one and I don't believe in the other. I think when you mentioned CGI there, like I don't want to, again, be derogatory to these performers and say it's like CGI, but I think that's exactly what I'm trying to get at. Like, even though CGI and practical effects both are fake, you're suspending your disbelief, there is a weight to the latter that the former doesn't have that allows that suspension of disbelief a bit more. And I think that, for me, that comes in with like the selling and how they work the match and the pacing of a match as well, and just believing in the drama of it.
I just thought you were brave enough to choose the Matrix Reloaded over the original Matrix. That's
well, no, because I like the Matrix 1. You know what I mean? Like the Matrix Reloaded when Neo's too good and he's just kind of like, he's bored by himself. He's like, I can't be bothered with it. Matrix 1 though, he's got a bit of sweat about him.
The OG.
He bleeds a little bit.
The stakes feel a bit higher.
The stakes feel higher, yeah.
This probably quite nicely segues into like our last question here, because I'm not going to hold you to this. This is not like a gunpoint thing. You can come on this podcast anytime you want.
Yeah.
But I am sort of curious because, the comments are going to want you on every week after this.
Nah, I don't think so. They're going to be like, get him out of here.
But, this does feel, as to go back to where we started, like WWE's hot, wrestling's pretty hot. You're kind of in it anyway, like stuck with it through working here. Could you see wrestling being more of a permanent thing, or could you see our investment increasing to the point where you consider it one of your Champions League level hobbies? We've all only ever got so much time, and if it did, like, what I guess would it replace? What would it supplant? I'm assuming gaming's for keeps.
Pretty much,
but like outside of gaming and outside of like your work commitments to that, do you imagine wrestling ever would occupy more of a space with you than it currently does?
Maybe a little bit more, and the annoying answer to that question ultimately is no, but maybe not for an indictment of the actual thing. And Nicholas is going to know too well by this. Like, I need something to end. It's the reason why I tried to get into comics when I was, a mid-teenager, and I loved my time with comics. But when I realized like stuff was just it was going to keep going forever, right? Mm-hmm. Spider-Man was always going to be getting older, and then he's going to go back to high school, and then we're going to do it all again, and the villain's going to come back. We're going to keep reinventing those stories, and those stories, are successful, but it's not a carousel that I can constantly be on, or it's not a roller coaster I can constantly be on. So I think that's the only thing that stops it. I'm the same with telly, man. I'm such an idiot with television. Like, I need to know something is going to have a final season before I start watching
I think that's unreasonable.
Yeah, because I probably overvalue my own time, right? And if I ever found that I'd spent I don't know, 6 months watching wrestling every week for it to ultimately disappoint or pivot into a completely different direction.
I'm just hello darkness moment there.
And I'm the same with games. Like, if I'm playing a game, like I want to see that thing to the end, even if I've played it for 20 hours and I'm not all that enjoying it. The idea of just stepping away, it's probably a problem I need to work through, but that kind of stresses me out a little bit. So that's probably why not. However, I do think it's so hot right now, like you mentioned, and what I'm liking about this period is that it has punched back through the mainstream in a way, and it started to cross over with a bunch of my other interests. I am booting up Call of Duty last week, right? So I can play as Cody Rhodes and Rhea Ripley, because they're the characters that have been added to this awesome, season of the game. And
the belt looks better in Call of Duty than it does in the WWE game, by the way.
His character model does. It looks unreal. Like the animations they've got for like his finishes and stuff. It's class. So to have that kind of crossover, I know this is completely tangential and goes to two interests that I'm very only casually interested in, right? But I saw Luke Littler of the darts fame walk out to Cody's theme song, Kingdom or whatever it is. And I just thought that was the best thing ever. I was like, this has a, like you said, sort of mainstream penetration and a mainstream buzz around it now that I haven't seen since I was a kid, you know?
No, it's and they want that, and it's all sort of in key. We're stuck with the content churn, but it doesn't have to be bad when the content itself is good.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel as much like a grind, I think, to get through when you're actually entertained by what you're seeing. That overlap as well. That is probably the biggest marker of just how popular something is. Because even if, so say there'll be wrestling fans hidden and dotted around in every industry, it's how hidden they choose to be. And if the product wasn't hot or Luke Littler wasn't having the crack with his mates or whatever, he's probably not picking Cody Rhodes' theme because he knows he's not going to get the rest of wherever he's playing darts to go, whoa! And they do, because it's more of a collective enjoyment. And when it gets rough, it feels pretty lonely.
That's it, I bet. I mean, I've heard you talk so much about like the low years where it felt like it was never going to get better, and you were just kind of like, what the hell? You
kind of resent people when they come back, not going to lie. There's some difficult times with some so-called friends about
a wrestling tourist, and I will not apologize for it. I take my summer holidays to SummerSlam, and I take my winter holidays to WrestleMania and Royal Rumble, and then that's all I do. But I will say that even though I don't think WWE's probably reached its limits. I've talked all this podcast episode about WWE. I feel it's unfair to not give the other promotions a chance. Like, I feel like AEW, if it's getting hotter, I feel like I sort of missed the boat on that for a little bit, where it was up here and then by all accounts maybe had a little dip, but now is maybe on the way back up, you know? But I would like
cyclical industry, promoters always call it. They always say wrestling works in cycles and ups and downs and swinging pendulums and all them other analogies. There's enough proof to suggest that is the case, and AEW will come good again.
Like, I thought, how long have we been on this podcast now, Adam Nicholas? That's enough to drop some stinking takes. I'm going to drop some now. I thought Tony Storm would have been my in for AEW, but I actually think that gimmick's a little rubbish and it doesn't work for me. But I wanted to like it more than I did. Same with Will Ospreay seems really good as well, so maybe that's going to be an in. Maybe All In at Wembley will be big enough to get me interested in that.
Looks like what you want it to look like.
Exactly, exactly. So I know I'd like to try others. TNA seems like it's doing something. I don't know, it's back.
It's just a zombie that cannot be stopped.
Yeah.
It's a zombie that's kind of become part of the family at this point. 20 years in, and it should have died 10 times over. You're like, oh, bless it.
I thought it was dead. Like, I thought when people were talking about it again, I was like, I thought this was over. I thought we finished this.
But a lot of people think that about TNA or Impact, and it's always there.
I will say as well, NXT.
That old Impact wrestling.
That old Impact there. I will say as well, you and Wilborn have showed me, I don't know the guy's name, the big guy who chucks people around in NXT.
Obafemi.
That he
does one spot a show that I now consider like the Josh Brown spot. That's the one I'm showing him tomorrow then,
yeah, so maybe, I mean, what I like as well, I keep just rambling now, just a bullet points,
I love it.
Mental breakdown of the final bits of this podcast. What I like is seeing wrestlers that I used to know, go to come back from creatively behind the scenes. Like, I know Shawn Michaels is doing NXT now, like Triple H was before, and I hope that makes me want to check back in. And I couldn't finish this podcast without talking about Maven. When I was off work last year, watched all of that guy's videos.
Yeah.
I have no connection with him, but I was like, yeah, give me that behind the scenes detail. Bring Maven back.
He got The Undertaker on his podcast and kind of like schooled the Dave man on this industry that he was better at. Undertaker's trying to make waves. He's trying to step on our toes, basically, become a podcaster doing the shocked Undertaker faces. But Maven has the power in that dynamic as opposed to how it was when they were like wrestlers. It's great to see that he's cornered that market before Undertaker himself got there.
I will say that Undertaker podcast was disappointing. I tried it. 6 Feet Under with Mark
Thank
Calloway.
You. Not microphone, Wilborn.
Wilborn.
He keeps mentioning it that way where normally he'll bury other podcasts in a gentle way. Like, a great podcast, not as good as ours. And then he mentions The Undertaker one. He's like, yeah, I kind of love him what the dead man's been saying. You working for him or something? He's scared of getting taken to wrestlers' court.
I think he is. He said nothing all
this guy's
podcast.
a scumbag. Refunds, no good. He's a piece of work.
Don't trust him. 3 hats. What's that about?
So you know more about the business than you're letting on. This has been great. Like, love to get you back on again, especially if it stays hot, or maybe in the run up to next year's WrestleMania. The more we get you on in this, and then the more we get Scott on in AEW, we'll have you two just like fighting tribally like all the people on wrestling Twitter do. It's going to be fun.
I'll give you this. If Roman comes back at the weekend, I'll be muscling my way on, and if CM Punk gets injured again, I'll be muscling my way on because
love it.
Yeah, those are my 2 conditions.
I don't love that specifically, but I love this. And if you love this and you just want more, because if there's one thing we said, it was content churn is never a bad thing. Subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling for more stuff like this. Subscribe to WhatCulture Gaming, of course, for more Josh Brown.
Yes, please.
Was it the Untitled Banter podcast today?
It was today. We do 3 podcasts a week. One is Scott and I, where we just wind each other up to wind you up every Monday. We do a main podcast, which is just more general, and then we do a questions-based podcast where we answer everyone who submits a question. That's a lot of questions.
Get on that. Get us all at WhatCulture WWE on X, where you can also find Josh Brown at
Josh Brown, but with an extra O, so it sounds like Brune.
You can get me at Michael Hamflett. You can get our brilliant producer at It's Adam Nicholas. And until next time, we will see you soon.
Thank you.